Hello and welcome back to the afternoon session of this year's York County Day presentation. My name is Amy Falkenberry and I'm honored to serve as the chair of the York County Regional Chamber this year, and I'm glad that you're able to join us. For those of you that were a part of the session this morning, we had a lot of discussion about transportation and the projects that are happening in Columbia and things that we can do here locally to help support that, and we're looking forward to an afternoon filled with really interesting topics that I think will benefit you if you're able to stick around until 4:30 to see us through. This particular session is presented by Founders Federal Credit Union, and it's going to focus on education and employment. There is an opportunity for you to type your questions in the comment section or in the chat box, and we are going to try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of this session. We're going to start with remarks from our beloved Wayne Wingate. He's a former longtime volunteer here with the Chamber and a champion of public education. When we get finished watching the video from Wayne, we are lucky to have Representative Ray Felder in the building today. She is on site and is going to give us a brief presentation, followed by our State Superintendent, Molly Spearman. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and we look forward to hearing from Representative Felder.
I went to school here. I went to Evanport, and it has been an interesting, it's been evolutionary type of thing. And I remember back in the 80s, I credit Joe Gentry. We had a couple of bond referendums and updated our physical facilities. And that was a big needed issue. And the district has continued to do a good job with our physical plants, keeping them up to date as well as possible for 60-year-old buildings. And then, our movement towards technology. We were really, I think, pretty much on the cutting edge of getting into technology. And, there've been a few school districts in the state, Hartsville was one of them, that had gotten into using technology in a big way, and so we moved into that. And so the district has really evolved with the times. We've been very successful with our bond referendums. Personally, I've co-chaired 4 or 5 different bond referendums, and all of them passed. So the community has been supportive of public education here for the last 4 decades with which I am familiar. And of course, during that time also, going way back when I was in high school, was integration. And Rock Hill did a great job, I think, assimilating our African-American students into the school district. It all went smoothly, and a lot of communities weren't that fortunate, but even going back to the 60s. So it's education's important to the people here in the community, and it shows.
Thank you and welcome. My name is Ray Felder. I represent House District 26, and I also chair the House Education and Public Works K-12 Subcommittee. So as many of you can imagine, this past year has been an incredible year of changes, opportunities, some setbacks with the pandemic, and trying to make sure that every child in our state has access to a high quality education. I appreciate the Chamber highlighting education and ways that we can improve that, and the opportunity to actually come today and have a conversation with all of you virtually about where we are now with the state of education in South Carolina. Last March, we had a state of education emergency. I mean, within moments, everything was going to be shut down that following Monday morning. It was definitely an education emergency. We were not prepared. Our districts did an awesome job trying to continue to offer quality instruction, but as a state, we were not prepared. Many parts of our state did not have access to broadband. We had many students that had no access to a device. There's not a computer in the home. So it was quite a challenge. We did make it through the school year with a lot of prayer, but we knew we had not done as good a job as we needed to. So our schools worked all summer. School leadership worked. Here in York County, they did an excellent job being as prepared as we could be to go back in September and offer quality instruction. So I do think the parents would agree that in September we were much better prepared. We handled the situation much better. However, throughout the state, we still had some serious setbacks. Looking forward, hopefully April 26th, we'll have another batch of schools that are actually going to offer face-to-face instruction 5 days a week. We'll still have a couple of districts that haven't yet made a plan for face-to-face instruction. So our children in some parts of our state have gone for over a year with no face-to-face formal education instruction. So not only are we going to have some that are not prepared to advance to the next grade, we're going to have a situation in our state where we have little opportunity to help an academic recovery program for those students so that they can move to the next grade. And I know later you're going to hear from Superintendent Molly Spearman. Her office and the State Department of Education have done a yeoman's job in trying to assist districts, give them the technical assistance they need, give them some mentoring, some ideas, some suggestions on what we can do this summer to try and recover some of that academics that unfortunately we've missed out in the past year. From the state level, we have done a very good job in providing broadband access. We had a grant program that went through the Department of Administration, and thank goodness so many of our businesses stepped up to the table to say, what can we do? We have poles, we have co-op electricity. We can use our poles to help assist in this. But everyone worked together to expand that broadband access, and I'm very thankful to the business community for stepping up. We are better prepared now. We have some best practices in place. Many of our districts are doing an excellent job. Here in York County, of course, we've always been a pocket of excellence when it comes to education. We have leadership within our county that really work together to make sure that every child had the opportunity for a high quality instruction, whether they chose face-to-face or whether they chose some type of virtual platform or even homeschooling. In our district, I think everyone has worked together very well. But just to give you an idea of how it looks outside of York County, I wanted to mention just a couple of things. This past year, it was uncharted waters. No one had ever dealt with a pandemic like this. And thank goodness in York County, our leadership did do an exceptional job, but the goal was to make sure everyone had access to high quality instruction. One of the topics this year, to give you an idea of how different the other part of the state can be, is allowing a public school who administers an AP test or an SAT or a pre-AC test. Here in York County, our districts work really well with our homeschool population, and they allow those children to come in and take those tests. They have to pay the cost of the test, but they do provide them access to being able to take the test with a certified testing instructor. We actually had to pass legislation this year because in some parts of the state, the public school was not allowing these students to come in and take those tests. Another example that kind of surprised me is we spent a lot of time last session, and again this time, discussing school lunch debt collection. We had a district in the state that was actually turning over a debt collection for lunch or breakfast to a collection agency. So the school district, the child would have a debt, the school district would notify the parents, send a letter home, whatever. Then they would add a late fee, and then they would turn it over to a collection agency, which then added more fees. Again, just to give you an example, that York County, we do live in one of the best places on earth. I would like to give a shout out too to your state chamber. This past year during the pandemic, and we were doing Zoom meetings and WebEx meetings and virtual meetings, Katie Titus with the State Chamber of Commerce has been so very helpful. Any piece of legislation that deals with workforce development, career readiness, Ms. Titus is always there to testify at those meetings, to give us the background, to give us why it's important for workforce development. So she has been a wonderful asset for myself as chair of the K-12 committee to be able to go to with questions. I'm looking forward to working with President Bob Morgan, who is now the president of the State Chamber of Commerce. I do believe he understands my passion for education and my passion to make sure that every child, regardless to their zip code, has access to a high-quality education. One thing, and later I'm sure when you hear from Superintendent Spearman, we're going to talk a little bit about the money. The federal government did allocate quite a bit of resources to try to help education, to give us the opportunity to reach out and try to bring these children up to grade level. So throughout our state, our individual districts, the money that actually flowed through the federal government, through the state coffer, to individual school districts is about $2.8 billion. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing those plans that districts will submit to the State Department of Education, outlining how they plan to use that their share, their proportion of that $2.8 billion to work with our students this summer. I try to use the word summer academic recovery. I don't really like the word summer school. That sounds punitive. And for these children, this is not a punitive thing at all. I'm just hoping it will be an opportunity that our families can use to try and help their child be best prepared for that next grade level and make up some of the ground that they may have lost since last March. So I think we will hear some very exciting things come out of York County. I think our 4 school district will do a yeoman's job of working together, implementing some best practices, implementing the best way to meet the needs of these children. And I'm sure that Superintendent Spearman will kind of walk you through what she envisions our districts to turn in with those plans. In the legislative topics this year, we've focused around 3 really major areas. The teacher shortage. We know we have a teacher shortage. Currently, we're about 600 teachers short throughout our state. So we know teacher shortage is something we have to work on. We also have to work on students' preparation for college and or career. Are we preparing these students correctly? And then we're looking at innovative ways to teach children. You know, just because we've always done it in a classroom with desk and a chalkboard or whiteboard or smartboard, maybe there is some changes we can make there. In terms of the teacher shortage, one thing we've looked at is teacher preparation. Are our colleges and universities really preparing our teachers to go into a classroom and be effective in that classroom? Are they prepared for the challenges they're going to face in a classroom? We also went back and was able to fund last year due to COVID and the pandemic and just not knowing financially where we were at, the teacher step increase, which is a contractual agreement that for years of service they get a pay raise. That was suspended last year because we were just so unsure of where we were going to come out financially. We were able to reinstate that this year to go back and pay that step increase that they did not get. So we know how hard our teachers are working. Our teachers have been asked to do multiple things in order to best meet the needs of the children. We've also looked at having a percentage of non-certified teachers when there just is not a certified teacher available. We're looking at an option there to keep from having to cancel classes. We also looked at removing the earnings cap so that a retired educator could come back into the classroom. In student preparation for college and career, we've looked at things like requiring high school students to do the FAFSA application to find out if there are federally aided grants, scholarships, tuition that they could qualify for before they draw down state dollars. So I think looking at that FAFSA application is going to be a good thing. We've also looked at computer science and how we probably need to re-energize that a little bit, make it a little more common in every high school that has a robust computer science program. We've also looked at math and English. So many of our high school graduates that go into their freshman year of college, they lose their scholarship money because they weren't prepared for college math and college English. So we're looking at requiring in that last year of high school, 4 years down the road, mind you, so the incoming freshman would know that my last year of high school, I'm going to need to take an English or a math or computer science class so that it will be very fresh on their minds as they enter their freshman year of college. In looking at innovative approaches for educating children, we're looking at things and studying and learning about competency-based education. Once you master that skill, can you move on to another task? Competency-based, not really how many hours you sat in a seat taking that class, but when did you master the subject? We also looked at schools of innovation, allowing districts to have a school of innovation where they can create a different teaching model, a different best practice model, what changes that need to be made. Then we can look back at that and say what really worked, what was a practice that they incorporated into their school of innovation that maybe we should look at doing statewide. So there's a lot of discussion around education. We've come a long way. We've got a lot farther to go. But I would like to take the time to thank every teacher, every person involved in that classroom, leadership, administration, for working so hard together to be able to reach out to these children and try our best to make sure everyone has access to that quality education.
Thank you so much, Representative Felder. We really appreciate your time and all of the thought that you put into your presentation, but more importantly, all of the time that you give of yourself in Columbia for our children and for your dedication to education in the state of South Carolina. We really appreciate your time. Sorry about that. Also, you can probably see on the screen now our State Superintendent of Education, Molly Spearman. We are thrilled that she not only is giving of her time today to be here with us, but I know that we're going to hear a lot of important information from her. I shared with her prior to us going live that in our home, as a wife of a school board member, we hang on her every word as information comes out from the state. And I'm sure many of you do, especially with children in our public schools. So we have quite a few tuned in to hear from you today, Superintendent Spearman, and we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate. I was trying to hear what Representative Felder was saying. She does a wonderful job. I so enjoy working with her, and you all are very fortunate in York County to have such great leadership. You're also very fortunate to have wonderful school systems, great leaders in the school system, wonderful teachers, good strong school boards. So you've got it really an excellent a level of excellence that we would like to see in every county in South Carolina. We're working on that, and some are there, but we've got some places that have a way to go. So I thought first I would go very quickly and just share some facts with you about where we are with our operations across the state. And Mark's going to be very kind to add my slides, and we're ready for the first slide, Mark. Yeah, and we'll go to the next one there. Great. Currently, we have 79 school districts in South Carolina, plus 2 districts that are our charter school districts. There are 5 charter schools that are virtual all of the time. They're not in this description. Of our 79 districts, 76 are currently offering full 5-day face-to-face instruction for all students. 3 districts will be moving next Monday to all students being face-to-face, and you see those are Colleton, Hampton 2, and Greenville. We'll go to the next slide and show you how many schools. There are 1,266 schools in the state. Full face-to-face 1210, 51 that are hybrid. And most of those are high schools that are currently 4 days a week. Greenville County, when they move over to full face-to-face for their high school students, you realize they have 10% of our students in the state are located right in that one district. So that will make a big difference. And here's your geography test on the next slide. See if you can locate those counties. I bet you all know Greenville's up in the top. And that's Colleton, the larger district down in the low country, with Hampton 2 beside it, and they'll be moving, as I said, next week. We're anxious to get all of our students back. It's been quite a challenge, and hats off to all of our teachers and administrators for being so nimble back last March when we switched overnight from regular operations to virtual operation, and for the plans that they made throughout the summer to get us prepared. Many have asked me, what have you learned? I would say the biggest thing that I've learned from this COVID-19 pandemic experience is that you have to be nimble, and you have to admit that you're learning sort of as you go. When we wrote our Accelerate Ed plan back in the summer, we knew very little about the virus. We were depending on the information from the experts at the CDC and from our own DHEC. And as school reopened, we learned a lot. And the biggest thing that we learned was that it worked, that those 5 mitigation strategies of wearing your face mask, social distancing, washing your hands, those 3 are and particularly the mask wearing really did work and help us be able to operate safely. And so we changed, and now we realize that even under high spread, schools can operate safely. Let's go to the next slide. This gives you a graph to show you how it worked among our school employees statewide. We started in early August, reporting daily how many COVID cases there were among school employees. You see that the spike occurred in mid-December, almost exactly 2 weeks after the Thanksgiving holiday. A sharp decline there while schools were closed over the winter break and Christmas holidays. Then we went back up, and on March the 8th, that's when the vaccine started becoming available to folks in South Carolina and to our teachers. And you can see that we've had a fairly steady decline there with one little shot up on March the 20th. But we really believe that with the continuation of vaccines that we'll be able to continue that downward trend through the rest of the year. We'll go to the next slide. One of the things that has been very, very helpful is the funding that has come from the federal government to assist us in preparing for the pandemic, as far as being having the materials, the masks, the gloves, the sanitizer, all of those things that we needed to be able to operate safely. And this is a chart that shows you a little more detail. There have been 3 different allocations of funding. We call it ESSER, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. There was ESSER 1 that brought a little over $216 million to our department and to districts. That was received back last summer. Much of that has been spent before the school year and during the school year. And I would say most of it has been on buying those materials that we needed to operate. Many districts, though, started evaluating, as they evaluated their students when they returned to school, started hiring additional teachers, tutors, to work one-on-one or in small groups with their students for interventions to help them accelerate their learning. So that has gone very, very well. In late December, Congress passed a large sum of money we call ESSER 2. You can see that that came to the Department of Education. The total amount was $940 million. The department is able to keep about 10% of that for statewide programming, and the rest is sent to school districts. School districts have until 2023 to spend that funding. So they are budgeting that now, working with the state budget, filling in the holes of those places that are necessary for more acceleration of learning, working with mental health issues, all the different things that we have been impacted from COVID-19. And finally, we have ESSER 3, which was passed on March the 11th. This is under the new Congress that went into office in January, and an extraordinary amount of money, a little over $2 billion, came to the Department of Education. Again, we keep about 10% of that, and within that 10% that we keep, we have strings attached as to how we need to spend it. It has to be spent by September of 2024, and we'll go to the next slide. And I'll show you here, you can see your own school districts. I want to point out, of course, the ESSER 1 funds they already have. They're spending that. ESSER 2, spending some of that now. The ESSER 3 school district folks, if you're on the call this afternoon, that is an estimate. We're working for the final exact allocation out to you. So please don't hold me to this if it varies slightly. But this is a good estimate of how much each of your districts will be receiving. Now, how do they spend it? Very, very carefully. And we'll go to the next slide, and I'll show you that we are monitoring this very carefully. In the ESSER 1 fund, there were 12 categories that the federal government said that districts could spend that funding on. The 3 additional were added to ESSER 2 and 3. And basically, what was added was facility needs, upgrading your air purification systems, HVAC, and any repairs or even some new construction could be paid for with ESSER 2 and 3 if it can be tied back and show that it's COVID related. So we are receiving some plans now in our department where districts are going to be upgrading HVAC systems, maybe putting on some additions to classrooms so that they can social distance and not be as crowded as they have been in the past. You can look over the different categories there. It's very, very wide open. And I think for once they've done a pretty good job of giving us, the department and the districts, the flexibility that we need to put this money where it needs to go. Now, I'll tell you, there is an extraordinary amount of monitoring that the Department of Education will be doing. Plans have to be sent to us from the districts. We have to approve that to be sure that they're being spent in the right categories. And districts have to report to us monthly, and then we do a quarterly report to the U.S. Department of Education. So a lot of monitoring, a lot of new responsibility on the Department of Education. In fact, we're hiring setting up a new office really to monitor and to make sure that these funds are spent just as they need to be. And you see there, the last sentence I think is very important. There's a very large emphasis on using these funds to support whatever needs to be done to address the academic impact of COVID-19. I'll show you the next slide. How do we know where our students are? Well, our legislature and Representative Felder helped lead in this in our Act 142, which was the budget that was passed in late summer for this year, required that every school district had to pre and post test with their interim assessments. You may know it as MAP, iReady. They're different tests that these are not teacher-made tests. These are standard tests that are linked to state standards that are given in the classroom and give immediate feedback to teachers on where their students are. So those have been done. You can see how they were administered, and the data had to be shared with the Department of Education. We used a new tool called Rally to analyze that data, and just recently we have sent that back to school districts, and you can see there it not only informs the classroom teacher on where their students are, it gives us some comparison data within districts in the state, and then it gives us a unified data source. We'll go to the next slide. And here's what the districts are busy doing right now. They are writing their recovery plans to tell us, we know now where our students are after those 2 assessments. And as you know, many districts will give the 3rd interim assessment on their own. Some, all will give the spring assessment where students will be taking those tests in those last 20, 30 days of school. But the information that they have now is divided into 3 tiers. Students who need mild remediation, those who need moderate, and those who need significant remediation, those who really have not learned what they need to learn this year. So districts are working on what are we going to do about that. And obviously I would say the things that work, that we know the best practices are, you've got to have more time on tasks. We've got to be with the students more. So it's very possible if you have a child who might fall particularly in tier 2 or 3, they're going to be asked to go to summer school. Are there going to be extra days at the beginning of next school year for those students to return early? Are there going to be after school programs where we'll be working with their students to accelerate and get them back on track with their learning? This is probably going to take a while. I don't think all of it will be accomplished in 1 year. So we're going to have a new mindset about moving students. What strategies do you use? And I heard a little bit of what Representative Felder said. I believe the other significant piece that we have to give as a state is to ensure that every teacher, particularly those in those early years, those pre-K, 3rd, 4th grade teachers with reading and mathematics, that they know how to work with students who are struggling, that they have those tools. So that's why we're doing additional professional development in reading, additional professional development in math, and we're also purchasing a lot of different softwares, a lot of different resources that will be right at the teacher's fingerprints. One of the good things that's come out of the pandemic is that we have received this funding, and we have been able to purchase a learning repository, which is a place out in cyberspace where fantastic lesson plans have been written and approved, and any of our South Carolina teachers can go to that, pick the standard and go to that for work. Each teacher now, every district in the state, every teacher will have his or her access a learning management system where they can talk with each other, where they can access all of the resources that are there. In the past, only our most affluent districts have had that resource. Now, every district in the state will have that, and we can push out good resources, good materials, good training, good professional development to all our teachers in a very efficient way. So those plans are being received now. We're approving those plans, and in the next few weeks, we will be designating how the state pot of money will be available. And to accentuate and really give an extra support to those districts if they need additional funding to carry out their academic recovery plan. So those are just a few things, Amy, that we have going on. I believe that's the last slide. Let's check it and make sure it is. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And again, I really appreciate the excellent standard that you all set in York County for your public schools, for the leadership that you have, and the involvement of the community and the support that you give your schools in York County. It really does take all of us working together to meet this challenge, that for our goal is the profile of the graduate, that when every child, no matter where they live in South Carolina, when they graduate high school, that they are ready for college, career, and to be a happy, productive citizen in not only York County, but South Carolina and in our nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation and for all of the information presented. I know I certainly learned a lot during your talk, and also from Representative Felder. I believe she's going to join us now so that we can enjoy some questions. We actually have quite a few that have come in from those that are watching. So if you don't mind, I'll just give 1 second so that we can get Representative Felder on the line here. It looks like she just unmuted. Don't you love technology? We need some of these students from South Carolina to come help us do this, don't we? They all know how to work all this better than we do. So, well, Representative Felder, thank you for sticking around and joining us for the Q&A. We have had quite a few things come in, and I'll let you all decide who wants to maybe take some of these first. One of the questions is related to masks. I know this was mentioned earlier. Do either of you see the schools lifting the mask mandates this year? Or I know we can't really predict the future for next year yet, but do you think this year we'll see that lifted?
Well, I guess I'll take that, Ray, since that we work with the school districts on that. And I think everyone needs to understand what our mask policy is. Yes, I did require masks to be worn on our school buses. And as in general areas where students are in the school system. Districts, schools, and teachers do have the flexibility to allow students to take off their masks when they're in the classroom, out at recess, those kinds of places. So there is flexibility there. And as far as the remainder of this year, we're down to the last few weeks. That is left up to the schools as far as in that school setting, and for when school starts back next year, I hope we'll be as normal as possible. But that is the flexibility that school administrators do have within their own setting right now.
One of the questions, and Representative Felder, this may be a good one to start with for you, but it relates to the base student cost. And I know that we hear a lot about that. I'm not sure that we all really understand the ins and outs of the base student cost being funded or not. And I know there's a formula to that, and there are other funds that come into play that, maybe at the state level is assumed it counts towards that. But when you look at the math locally, maybe we don't feel that it is truly funded. So could we dispel some of the myths, or at least maybe discuss the future of the base student cost and its funding?
Well, every year that I've served in the legislature, we have had the conversation about the base student cost, and the formula is so complicated until there's probably less than a handful of people that can really explain what all goes into that. This year in the House budget that we sent to the Senate, it does have an increase for base student cost. We're also, I think, looking at the entire way of funding public education. You know, you have base student cost, and we have some additional monies that come through EIA. We have some monies that come through lottery. At one time, there was like 81 different line items in the state budget that in one place or another touched public education. I do hope that we will streamline that to make it much more understandable as to how much money, but even with the base student cost, you have to realize that that is weighted in very different, based on a student's academic ability, you have a weight. Based on any other disabilities, you have a weight. Based on poverty level, you have a weight. So you can't really blanket and say every child in our state gets $8,200 per year, because some get $16,000 per year and some get $6,000. So base student cost is so complicated until I think we do ourselves more of an injustice than if we totally looked at education funding and maybe reinvented that wheel.
So that actually leads to another question related to, of course, Act 388. We all knew that would come up. So when it comes to education funding, you know, in South Carolina as a chamber, we feel that that's going to involve, you know, massive tax reform, not just moving numbers around to meet the base student cost in its current form. Do you see any possibility that the tax structure will change so that Act 388 no longer impacts our districts the way it has?
I don't see the voters going to the poll and eliminating Act 388. I do think that there is a huge push, not only with the leadership in the General Assembly, but the public as a whole, is to really do a comprehensive tax reform in our state. I mean, it's very much outdated. Representative Tommy Pope has really championed this, that it's time that we really holistically look at our tax base, and all the many different areas of taxation. You know, I mean, you can't just talk about sales tax. You know, you've also got to talk about property tax. And Representative Pope has done an excellent job convening a group together and really drilling down into this and having some very open discussion.
But I know as a business community, that is something, you know, that we're very interested in seeing improvements on. We obviously as businesses feel, especially small businesses, we feel like we're the backbone of these communities, and not only providing tax funds, but also just, you know, service and being a part of the community and trying to participate. But when you know, that is decided for us on the front end as a business where those funds will go, and it really I think sometimes stops progress. So I appreciate Tommy's efforts, or Representative Pope's efforts, and yours on that, and look forward to seeing some progress soon. So, this next question I think is going to be more back to Superintendent Spearman. The ESSER funds that you showed, one of the questions is asking whether or not any of those funds are allowed to be used to address the mental health impact of COVID-19, or just mental health in general. We know our students are struggling, especially those that you mentioned that have not been in a classroom in way too long, but just, you know, some of their social and mental health needs. Are those funds available for that?
Yes, and in each of the three funds, that is allowable. We here at the department also feel that we need to do more for state support to districts. So we are looking at adding additional staff to support, additional resources. There's so many different areas where we know that students and their families have suffered, whether it's high school students who have had to go to work in order to help the family out and are not participating in their schooling like they should, families who have lost their jobs, lost family members. Just the stress of the pandemic has been tremendous on so many folks. So yes, it can be used. One of the issues that we're running into, though, I heard Representative Felter mention something about the teacher shortage. There's also a shortage in those mental health counselors. So the Department of Mental Health 2 years ago, because this is not a new issue. It has certainly worsened during the pandemic, but working to make it easier, make it more accessible for folks to get their credentialing as a mental health counselor working in schools. So yes, and we encourage districts to consider that.
Right. Representative Felder, anything you want to add on that?
Well, I do think that we can never overlook the social and emotional that this has been, especially for the children that did not have that face-to-face interaction. And I do think that as all of our schools open up and all of our schools are back to face, we're going to realize that there is a tremendous need. And I applaud the department for working with the state mental health now prior to COVID. We were actually working together trying to find ways to have more availability of this expertise in our school districts.
And Amy, thank you, Ray, for mentioning that. I appreciate it. One thing that might be of interest to your members, through the pandemic, the whole spotlight on access to the internet or lack of has really brought us to our knees in some places. But I want you to know that working with the Department of Mental Health, we have an extraordinary success story in mental health. There's so many communities across South Carolina where a psychiatrist or psychologist is not even available. It could be an hour away for students. So over the last 2 or 3 years, we have developed and implemented with the Department of Mental Health telepsychiatry. And even before the pandemic, we had done over 100,000 sessions with students and a psychiatrist receiving their counseling by mental health. And we were able to keep that going during the pandemic. So hats off to the Department of Mental Health and their leadership on this. But another area, as Ray mentioned, that we just have to keep it growing because the need is there.
Well, along the same lines, there was a question regarding the ESSER funds. I know that a lot of the immediate transition to online learning, we realized that there were gaps for our teachers in terms of their level of comfort with some of the systems that were being used. At their home, was their internet strong enough, to host the class? So we did see a lot of challenges. Are the ESSER funds available for either additional training for teachers moving forward, really as it looks to being prepared for, hopefully not in our lifetime, another pandemic like this? I know there were a lot of lessons learned, but do those ESSER funds not only try to correct for what has happened during this situation, but prepare for the future?
Yes, all of the above. And I should have mentioned that earlier. That's one of the most popular, or one of the highest percentage of ESSER 1 funding was spent on purchasing the devices, the rental of hotspots, whatever. And the General Assembly was very forward thinking in making sure that the money that came down through the CARES Act that came to the governor, and then the General Assembly really helped appropriate that it went into broadband expansion. And I think you're going to continue to see that improve, and we've come a long way in a year. But there was a lot of training. We actually worked with our charter schools who had been, those that had been virtual. A lot of the professional development that they had used with their teachers and lessons learned. They were very generous in working with all of our traditional teachers in professional development modules, but that is ongoing. And I think the whole virtual question, what's it going to be next year? Some folks have asked, are you requiring districts to offer 2 options next year? And the answer is no, we're not. That is left up to the districts as to whether or not they will offer a virtual. it's a lot of extra work. So I don't think you see districts clamoring to do that on their own, but we are seeing a huge demand from parents saying, we want this. So some students were very successful with it. So as of today, I think we have 19 districts who have notified us that they are interested in doing some type of virtual programming for next year because their parents are asking for it. So this debate about how much are we going to offer and how is it funded, Ray? That's under discussion right now. And I think there's some members of the General Assembly who think it should be funded at a lesser amount so as to make districts not want to do it. But again, I know Representative Felder knows this. It's not so much the districts feeling they have to do, wanting to do it, but we have parents who are demanding it and they want to meet the needs of those parents.
We, our oldest son actually is benefiting from the SC virtual option with his AP US history class this year. And I have to say, you know, the first day of class this semester, it was just very smooth. You know, it was as, you know, because they have been doing it a long time, right? And so you could kind of feel that difference. And I know, you know, I've been very impressed with what we've seen here in York County as it relates to flexibility and the agility of our districts and our teachers. And, you know, as much as they want to, you know, scream and vent when the screen, you know, when the camera is off, they don't make you feel that way. The children, I don't think, feel that way, you know, the majority of the time. So I do think, you know, we're very lucky here in York County. Our school districts are part of the reason why we're growing as fast as we are. You know, when you have excellent products throughout the county, it's easy to attract new businesses and new jobs. And we have a lot of people who want to live here that work in Charlotte or elsewhere. So this next question that came in is really not probably as pertinent to us in York County, but and forgive me for personally not knowing the background on some of this. Representative Felder, you may be able to answer the piece about where this legislation is in the process, and then you know, we can look at what it might look like. But I believe there's some legislation that has been put forth that would allow the state Department of Education to take over districts that are underperforming. And I know that has happened, I believe, already in a couple of districts. How many districts do you see that impacting? And is that something that has passed, or, you know, what does that look like for South Carolina?
Well, the House has passed the legislation. The district for years, I'm not sure how long, has had the ability to take over districts. Is what I think the legislation is more making it a streamlined process, giving the State Department the tools that they need in the toolbox. When a technical assistance and mentoring and reaching out, when it's not working with the district, it allows the State Department to go in with very much, if you will, an outline of this, and this is how we're going to do this. In an attempt so that once a district has to be taken over in a state of education emergency, or a school has to be taken over, or an entire district, the State Department then has the tools it needs, not only to turn that district around and get it moving in the right direction, but to keep it moving in the right direction. We've had some experience in the state where the State Department can go in and right the ship and get things, but if you can't keep it moving forward, then we're right back starting over.
And if I may just, and Ray explained that very well, I'll just add the question, how many of our 79 districts currently, the state is managing 3 of those districts. Those are Florence 4, which is Timmonsville. And believe it or not, they have about 670 students in the entire district, not a school, but the entire district. It's the second to the bottom. Our smallest district only has 570 some odd students. Okay, I was down there Thursday night. We also manage Allendale, and we're managing Williamsburg. And all three of those were the reason for my declaring an emergency in those districts was different but similar. Usually leadership had made some really poor decisions. Williamsburg County was not managing their special ed federal programs well. We had tried to work with them over a 2 to 3 year period, very little improvement. And sometimes, believe it or not, there's corruption, or we know there's wrongdoing, or just a variety of not good reasons is why we make that decision. And I can tell you it is not made quickly, but it is only done when it's absolutely necessary, because it is a tremendous amount of work extra work on me as state superintendent and our staff. But so far in all three areas, we have been able to make improvements. The teachers in one district were so hungry, they came for professional developments on Saturdays. We found out they were not teaching the standards. They did not have the right textbooks. The resources were not aligned with the expectation of students. So I've been very aggressive with that, and I really appreciate the General Assembly's support. Right now, the big question that's part of the legislation that's going through is, should the school board members be removed? Currently, they just lose all their authority, but they're actually still there. They're actually having elections, but there's nothing for them to do. And so this legislation would actually, would cause the school board to be dissolved, not just there without authority, but be dissolved, and then appointed members for when we leave that would be under the supervision of the state board for a period of time before elections would then be held again. And the reason for that is just the history. Inez Tenenbaum back in the 90s did move into Allendale, made some improvements there, and as soon as the state left, the board kind of went back to their old ways. So that's why I've asked the legislature to pass this legislation, and it's moving forward. There's some opposition because that's a pretty aggressive step, but it's one that I really believe should be done.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I know we're getting short on time. We did have a couple of other questions. You know, in the chamber world, we talk a lot about workforce development. You both mentioned it in your presentations. You know, we have a lot of companies here that work with districts. For instance, York Electric has a lineman, you know, class that they've worked with York School District to put into place. One of the questions is, as we get back to school and have to get children, you know, determine if they're up to speed or, you know, behind, or kind of where that baseline is. Do you think we're going to be more focused on back to basics and getting students caught up and lose momentum on any of the workforce development programs? I think too, just to piggyback on that with the other question, there's some concern about the fact that internships haven't been allowed. You know, some of the on-site learning and on-site tours, you know, a lot of the things that were able to happen in businesses are not happening now because of COVID. So I do think there has been some momentum lost. But do you think that workforce development gets pushed back at all because of this pandemic?
My personal opinion is not at all. Our state is growing at such rapid numbers. We have industry that, I mean, they're seeking out South Carolina. You know, 20 years ago, we talked about industry seeking out the Carolinas. But now we're really in a position where they're looking at South Carolina. It is our responsibility to make sure that they have a workforce, and to make sure that workforce is capable of those soft skills and those needed skills that business needs. So I think, yes, we have to focus on academics. We have to work to catch these children up. But I think in our advanced grades, having that well-rounded student that is both college and or career ready, that's the goal. I mean, that's where we want to be. And I think that work readiness will always be a huge piece of what we look at, especially in those high school years. is trying to help that child map out a plan of action that will allow them to have a livable wage upon high school graduation, or allow them to have the skills necessary to pursue higher education. But every child should be able to graduate. Every child with the ability should be able to graduate high school and have the potential to earn a livable wage.
Do we have time?
Yes.
And I agree completely with Ray. I'll tell you, one of my challenges as state superintendent is to be sure that the career opportunities for skills building is there for every student in South Carolina. You all, again, are so fortunate in the York County area with your career centers, with your businesses, and the connection and the support that you give there. I think we have to continue to work very closely with businesses to know what the up and coming skills that are needed, and that we keep a step ahead rather than 5 years behind. We've got to be ever evolving to meet your needs, and starting that out in elementary, middle school, and for sure in high school, that they're working on those skills. I have been working to expand opportunities across our rural South Carolina so that the programming may never be to the extent that it is in York County, but those students need as much opportunity as possible. So we're looking at building regional career centers where students may have to drive buses, take students to regional centers similar to what you have that would serve many districts, and we're working on that. So I live in one of those areas, in a rural area, so I have a real burden that we don't overlook the talent of those students who are out in those areas, and try to meet those opportunities too. So for the agriculture or whatever, right now cybersecurity down in the Salkehatchie, Aiken area is just huge. So we're really working with the chamber, and even this ESSER money, to make sure that it's spent wisely to build those programs there as well.
Well, because I prefer happy talk, and I know we have talked a lot about some really big issues and things that don't have easy, overnight, inexpensive solutions. But could I ask each of you, and I guess I'll start with you, Representative Felder, to maybe speak to what you think is the silver lining of this past year? I know we've all learned a lot of hard lessons, but as it relates to education, do you see the fact that we have all been through this together? Is there a silver lining for South Carolina students?
I think there is. I think there's definitely a silver, you have to look at everything and find the good. I think our parents now appreciate that teacher more than they ever have. When that parent had to stay home with their child and watch that teacher virtually trying to connect and engage that student, and not just one. I mean, you had 20 children on the screen that you're trying to engage and connect with. Our teachers did a phenomenal job. But I think now more than ever, our parents realize how difficult that teacher's responsibility is, because a teacher is not only teaching academics, that teacher is the social and emotional support for so many of these students. So I think a silver lining there is a true understanding and appreciation from a lot of our parents that maybe had never had that exposure. I think the other is going to be what we're doing today, the technology. Many of us, both educational, business, government, we were all forced, if you will, to advance our knowledge of doing virtual. I mean, we all had to learn how to do a Zoom meeting or a web meeting. And I think that's here to stay in so many venues. I think we'll continue to build on this. But I think our students, even though there are some that have excelled virtually and they've actually performed better, for a great percentage of ours, they're eager to go back to school. They're happy to go to school and have a recess. So I think that's a a silver lining that we can really wrap our arms around and make something really good out of that. So I am definitely looking forward to that.
So I agree with Ray. The other things that I would say, the expansion of broadband has been phenomenal. The ability with the funding that we have received federally has been a tremendous boost to what we're able to do, and that will carry out for a long time. Teachers will benefit from this. And I think for us as an agency, we had to streamline some things. And like, for one, teacher evaluations, we streamlined what was required. And now we're hearing from teachers and principals, why don't we do it like this all the time? This is so much more efficient. So we are currently going through the things that we changed, and of those, what do we need to keep because it worked better? So that's going to be a silver lining for us. And finally, I would just say, I think that anytime you go through adversity, and we certainly have all been through adversity together, you come out a stronger people, your character is stronger. And knowing that we're going to make it through this together, working with the General Assembly, our relationships there with parents, our relationships should be stronger, appreciating the teachers and the students, just as Ray said, just appreciating school. And all of that has made us of stronger character. And that too is what we're about in education, is building good character. So it's caused us to be better. And I hope we can be smart enough to keep all of that going after this is over.
Well, I cannot thank both of you enough for being here this afternoon. Obviously, you're very passionate about education in the state of South Carolina and have a heart for our children. And as a parent and a business leader, I certainly appreciate all you all are doing to help keep us on the right track. I know it's a thankless job and it's not an easy one. So thank you for what you do every day, and certainly for your time today. And with that, we are actually going to take a quick break. I know we enjoyed a video from Wayne Wingett earlier. We do have a few other little surprises for you in our last session. We are going to be discussing economic development, and we have Representative Gary Simrell joining us, along with the brand new CEO of the South Carolina Chamber, Mr. Bob Morgan. So we will be back live at 3 p.m. and hopefully you too, along with the others watching now, can join us again at 3 p.m. Thank you again and have a great week.
Thank you.
And welcome back. Once again, my name is Amy Falkenberry, and I serve as the chair of the York County Regional Chamber of Commerce this year. On behalf of the Lake Wiley and Clover Chambers, I'd like to welcome you to this York County Day event. This is the final session of the day, so for those of you that were able to join us earlier and talk about education and transportation and all that's happening in South Carolina, I think this will be a great topic for us to end on here with economic development. And we have two great speakers lined up for this presentation. The session here is, this last session is sponsored by Domtar and Comporium, both wonderful partners for the Chamber and for our communities. And we look forward to diving into economic development a little further. I'd like to remind you that there is an opportunity to, in the chat box, enter any questions that you might have as the speakers are presenting, but we will have time for a question and answer at the end. So we look forward to your participation in that. We're going to start with a brief video highlighting some of our community's past developments and strategies as it relates to economic development. And when the video ends, we are lucky to have Representative Gary Simrell here today. He is going to be able to give us some of his insights, and then we'll hear from Bob Morgan from the South Carolina Chamber. Thank you again for being with us.
Have always had a little bit of interest in politics, and the Chamber gave us that opportunity to, to have some involvement and sometimes having the ability to affect what was actually going on with legislation, or at least making sure that the elected officials knew what you thought. And so being able to do that was rewarding.
I think one of the most important activities of the Chamber is its relationship with governments, both intergovernmental relations within York County, as well as governmental relations on a statewide basis. And our governmental task force, which I've been part of a number of years, very closely tied to the agenda of the state chamber and what we can all do together.
When I first went to Springs in the early 70s, Marshall Donald was chairman of a newly created planning commission, and I was assigned to help put together a promotional brochure called New York County. And what it did was, hey, here's what we need. We didn't have countywide sewer, didn't have countywide water, road problems, all of those things that we cataloged in that brochure. I wish I'd had a copy of it because it was 50 years ago. But it laid out the map for what became a planning and zoning ordinance. Didn't have any of that. Had some of it in the cities, but not out in the county. Had laid the groundwork for the conversations about how do we get water and sewer out to areas that don't have it, but we want development to occur. It was a work in progress in the 70s and early 80s. And York County Day evolved out of all those myriad kinds of discussions to say, well, what about Columbia? Why can't we get something out of Columbia? Well, the reason we couldn't get anything from Columbia was we didn't have anybody down there. And the people we had down there didn't know anything about us.
We're not in the upstate, and we're not in the Midlands, and we're not at the coast, or in lower state, because there's no definition that we fit into other than what we came up with then was York County's red hot. And we still are. We're still the fastest growing county in the state of South Carolina. And I believe I'm correct on that. I haven't been reviewing the numbers lately, but I know we have been for a long time, and possibly even one of the fastest growing counties in the state, and not just in the state, but in the whole country, certainly in the Southeast. And there's more competition for the attention from Columbia. We have been very fortunate. We've had some good elected officials from our area. They are now in positions of authority and responsibility in the State House and in the Senate. And we're getting some, I think we're seeing some benefit from that, none that I can itemize for you. But I know that we're getting that because I know how hard those guys are working to be sure that we get our recognition that we certainly deserve and need.
Good afternoon. I'm Gary Simrell, represent Rock Hill in the State House and have since 1992. I currently serve as the majority leader in the South Carolina House. And it's interesting to me to have listened to the sessions today of the important topics and economic development as we finish up with what that is and what it means to South Carolina. Economic development is as only good as all the other topics that we talked about today because they all run together. They build on each other. In South Carolina, we're now home to over 5.1 million people. Well, as the growth rate has come to South Carolina, obviously there's a reason people come. And we know that the real reason is three: people, the people, the people. Governor McMaster reminds us of that all the time. But in reality, not just the people, but the ability to have a job, get a better job, grow a business, start a business. Those are all key components to what makes South Carolina so great today. As we start looking at what economic development means, I always tell people, let's start at the coast and work our way back, because the port of South Carolina in Charleston obviously is a mouth that feeds so many businesses from around South Carolina and really beyond. And of course, if you come straight up from the port, 26th, then hit 77 and go north, you hit Rock Hill, South Carolina, and York County. And so I think that connectivity back between us as a pivotal county in South Carolina being just below Mecklenburg County. It's often been said that when you're under the shadow of an oak tree and you're trying to grow grass, it's difficult for two reasons. Number one, the oak tree shades the grass. The other is it sucks the nutrients out of the ground. And in many instances, we saw us being next to North Carolina, us trying to be the grass and them being the oak tree. Well, fortunately, we have Bob Morgan, who was part of the oak tree. I guess you'd call him a nice limb on the oak tree, is now in South Carolina working with the State Chamber of Commerce as its CEO. So we're proud to have him, recognizing that he's now in the right Carolina to work with us. But that being said, York County and Rock Hill had to separate themselves and really succeed where some said it couldn't be done. And you go back to the 80s when we were transitioning from a textile town to a service-oriented town, and that was a difficult time with unemployment in the 18% range. But leadership in this area saw to it that, number one, we transitioned well, but number two, we adapted. And so if you start looking today at sports tourism in York County and in Rock Hill, what a difference that has made. We actually made ourselves a destination. Well, one of the biggest things that's happened to us really this decade, if not this century, is the Carolina Panthers. And the fact that their headquarters will be right here in York County and in Rock Hill speaks volume to us working together. But it goes back to the economic development side of things, and that is being competitive with the other 49 states that are around us and really globally as well, but especially in the Southeast. It's interesting when you start looking at revenue generated by states, tax revenue received. South Carolina is a high point among our southeastern neighbors. So those things make a difference, but it's only possible when you have everyone at the table and everyone really looking in the same direction to draw off of that. So education is extremely important when it comes to economic development. Our higher education, both at the technical level and postgraduate, all very, very important as we move forward. So as this movement happens, as South Carolina moves forward, as York County moves forward, we had to keep all of that in mind. So the funding of how things operate in South Carolina, how we get from point A to point B, that we draw a Carolina Panthers, or we draw a Boeing, or back in the 80s we drew a BMW. Those are the hallmarks that you hear about. What you don't always hear about are the small incremental additions to existing businesses or small businesses that come in many cases to help out a larger business, to be a supplier in that network. Well, all of that then depends on infrastructure. It was Governor Haley at one point in her administration had said that every zip code in every county in South Carolina is important. And we took that to heart. What that means is applying infrastructure grants and needs in more rural areas that allow them the same opportunities that we've seen in the more suburban, urban areas. So South Carolina raises up. They said the tide lifts all boats. Well, we want to make sure that the jobs are all over South Carolina, not just in the urban and suburban areas, but in the rural areas. Well, look at GT Tire down in Richburg. Look at the Gallo project that we talk about now. Those things are in more of a rural setting, but certainly draw great employment to the people of South Carolina. That's part of the very fabric that we're talking about in moving South Carolina forward to make sure that we're ready for the next big thing that comes our way. But the growth that we've seen here, the growth in the income of jobs, businesses relocating, starting or expanding in South Carolina, extremely important, again, to that fabric of what keeps our economy really pumping. And so by having some abilities that North Carolina doesn't have, helps us out tremendously, especially being on the state line. The fact that we now have an infrastructure plan in place, not just for roadways, expansions and bridges, but for underground infrastructure that you don't always see, water and sewer, that allow the business then to grow and to cover more territory geographically as well as demographically. All those things are extremely important to South Carolina. So as we continue this drive, unfortunately, many times, politics gets in the way of policy. And I've often said when politics and policy clash, unfortunately, politics wins. And so you've seen in South Carolina the unfortunate situation where the Department of Commerce has been challenged. I'm very grateful that we have Bobby Hitt as the head, the Secretary of the Department of Commerce here. But we have fought hard to make sure that what Commerce is doing in trying to gather more jobs, to allow companies to expand, is done in a very competitive manner. There is a follow-through with what Commerce does at the end. There's an accounting for everything, but let South Carolina do what South Carolina does best, and that is attract jobs, attract companies, and attract high pay at the same time. This must be done in a competitive environment, and I think most of us in the General Assembly do recognize that concept and how it pays huge dividends for South Carolina. So in closing, I look forward to having an opportunity with Mr. Morgan to talk about increased economic development in South Carolina, as well as what Rob Youngblood often tells us in the York County Chamber, of taking a little bit of a bow of what this chamber has meant to business and prosperity in South Carolina moving forward. With that, I look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Representative Simrell. You've certainly given us a lot to think about there, and really a lot to be grateful for here in South Carolina. We always know here in York County, we have a lot of I guess, things in our favor as it relates to an international airport and being near the mountains and near the sea. And we've got an interstate right by us. So there's a lot of things that have certainly made it easier for those involved in economic development. But there are a lot, as you mentioned, there are a lot of other things that go into the state being attractive to businesses moving here. So thank you for pointing that out, and for all of your hard work on helping get the Panthers to choose York County as their home. So I know that took a lot of heavy lifting. So thank you for your efforts on that. We are very pleased today to have Bob Morgan with us. He is the new chair of the South Carolina State Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if he wants me to continue Gary's metaphor and introduce him as the limb on the oak tree, but I figured that might be my one chance to do that. So Bob, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and Majority Leader Simrell, thank you for welcoming me to be a part of the South Carolina team. You know, my new office is on the 11th floor of the tower, right across from the South Carolina Capitol grounds. And as Meg and I have been learning our way around Columbia, we have fallen in love with the State House building. We've fallen in love with the grounds and all the landscaping. Today, as I'm sitting here on the 11th floor looking down on some of the treetops, there's a beautiful large hawk who is soaring through this Carolina blue sky. And it's a beautiful sight. And you have a great place to work. And we appreciate the pro-business work that you do and the partnership that you have with our chamber and the business community across the state. I was asked to address how has York County positioned itself to be so successful? And I have been around long enough to have seen and been a part of a lot of the growth in the Charlotte region of the last 3 decades or so. I may be uniquely qualified for this particular gig because I am a Tar Heel, but 30 years ago I married a Gamecock. So I think I figured out the whole "who's the real Carolina" thing. It was back in the day, it was football season was this side of the line and basketball season was the other side. Things have gotten a little mixed up lately, but I do think it's important for us to acknowledge that we're part of a great region. And when I say region, I'm reminded of a couple of years ago when the Chinese ambassador to the United States was in Charlotte to celebrate the Chinese New Year, of all things. And he got up to the podium in front of a group and he started talking about what a great region Charlotte is. He said, you've got that great port down in Charleston, and you've got the great universities and the research of the Research Triangle Park, and you've got the automotive manufacturing of the upstate and Charlotte's airport and the banking that you have. And it really was a good reminder that when you're in economic development in Charlotte, you are selling the region. And the fact that more product from Charlotte comes in and out of the port of Charleston than any of the North Carolina ports by far. And you're also competing, of course, in the economic development business. And York County has just been so successful. I remember when I started at the Chamber in 1991, that was about the time that York County put on the cover of its marketing materials a photograph of the Charlotte airport. Just like the Port of Charleston, there's probably no greater generator of economy throughout the Carolinas. And so kudos to those who saw that as an asset that you could claim as your own. In York County, you all have invested in education in such a way that you have attracted a significant portion of Charlotte's workforce, people who are raising families, who are attracted to some of your great neighborhoods. And public education is a big part of that. You all have invested in your transportation infrastructure. We have watched with envy from the north side of the border as Jerry Helms and Bayless Mack and others, Rob Youngblood, went after the pennies for progress. Some of you may recall that my younger brother Tim was Rob's predecessor at the York County Chamber. And what that program has done to help you keep up with the growth, to connect you to the counties around you, to help you continue to move people and product in and through York County, again, is the envy of a lot of the rest of us who haven't been quite as forward thinking. York County has become very competitive, not just as a bedroom community for folks that work in Charlotte, but you're now competing for white collar jobs. And you're the home to the corporate headquarters of a company like Domtar that a lot of people think of as being in Charlotte, but it's not. And that's not by accident. It's because you all have made the strategic investments that have attracted them and certainly will attract others. With all of that, it doesn't happen without strong leadership, right? And the York County Chamber has played a role. Some of the names that I've mentioned already, throw in a Roddy Broadnax, who may be a part of this program, who has been a strong friend and supporter on both sides.
Also a cousin of Representative Simrell, by the way.
Well, I wasn't going to embarrass the majority leader and point that out, but thank you for doing that. But yes, there is a great connection. And so I'm just real excited to now have the opportunity. When you look at South Carolina, you've got the markets of the upstate and Charleston, which are amongst the hottest that you're going to find anywhere in the country. You've got what's happening down in Augusta that's going to have a spillover impact with some of the cyber security work that's being done. I've been asking, what do we call the York, Lancaster, Chester area? I've been told we call it the Piedmont area, or if we want to be historically accurate, the Old English Settlement. I don't know how many people still call it that, but clearly one of the great assets. Columbia, not quite as hot economically, but of course the state capital and home to the university, and see an opportunity for the state chamber to play an even stronger role as we pursue the mission to be the leading voice for business in South Carolina. There's some issues before the legislature that are being dealt with as we speak. COVID liability protection being at the top of our list, and that will find its way into the House Judiciary Committee this week. We've been a strong proponent of the hate crimes bill. I like to tell people South Carolina is the most welcoming state I have ever been in. I now know that from personal experience. Why wouldn't we let the rest of the world know that we are open and welcoming and good people belong in South Carolina, and we welcome them. To the business community, things like Senate Bill 2, which contemplates the splitting up of DHEC, very important, something that we're following. But we also have an opportunity, I believe, to, as we assume the role as the leading voice of the business community, we have an obligation to help define what that means. What is the business agenda? And yes, it is about individual bills that may be before the legislature in a given session, but there's also some broader guiding principles or values that that we can help to define and communicate and market to people who are already here, and it can be used to market to people who aren't. It matters that we're a right to work state. That status is threatened with what's happening in Washington now. We all need to be eyes wide open about that. It matters that we have one of the best technical community college systems to be found in the Southeast and in the country, and that's has to be a big part of our answer to this this almost crisis of a workforce shortage as we come out of the pandemic economy. It matters that we have invested in the Port of Charleston and other transportation infrastructure. And so I could go on, I won't, but establishing and communicating and celebrating those guiding values is a role for us to play here at the South Carolina Chamber. And I'm just very excited. The folks who are on this team already, who some of you will know, incredibly strong talent with a solid economy, good, strong, pro-business leadership in the legislature throughout the State House, and just very glad to be here. As I said, I figured out the North Carolina, South Carolina Tar Heel Gamecock thing a long time ago. My biggest challenge is going to be figuring out the whole Clemson thing. That one's going to be a little bit hard.
I can't help you with that.
But I'm delighted to have the opportunity. I'm delighted to be here on this panel with my friends from York County. I look forward to being with you in person, and thank you.
Thank you very much. It sounds like you have hit the ground running and are certainly getting settled there in Columbia. We will give Representative Simrell just a moment to join us here on this session, and then we will take care of some questions from the group. Representative Simrell, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sticking around for the Q&A. You all both touched on quite a few topics, some of which are actively being monitored and looked at by our Government Relations Task Force that is headed up by Rick Duran from Duke Energy. Bob, I believe you guys have worked together in the past. I don't normally drop Rick's name as a leading name. You never know which way that might go, but I know his fiance is at least watching. So Karen, that was for you. But no, I appreciate you guys being here. We do here in York County, I think, try to stay as in touch and aware and involved in issues in Columbia. A lot of that is made possible because we have a very strong delegation. And so in keeping an eye on what they care about, obviously it makes it easier for us to know what might be a hot topic there. COVID liability is one of our top concerns right now for our business members. Could each of you kind of speak to maybe what the legislation would and wouldn't do in terms of protections? And I know, Bob, you mentioned that it's a priority for the state chamber, but if maybe you could speak to some of the things we could do here locally to help assist in that effort. Representative Simrall, do you want to start?
I'll defer to Bob. The bill he mentioned is going into the judiciary. It has passed the Senate, which I think was the biggest hurdle for COVID liability. And so we are at a good point now. Of course, in the framework of how we operate in the South Carolina General Assembly, there's this magical date called crossover, which happened the first week of April. Of course, the COVID liability, Bob met that threshold, and so now it's up to us to get it back to the Senate.
Yeah, and I would just say that we all need to be ready to communicate. It is the House Judiciary Committee this week. And, one of the things I'm learning, and Representative Simrall, you can attest to this. I'm just going to guess that it matters more for you to hear from business people back home than it does from me sitting here in Columbia. And so, one of the things that I think there's a tremendous opportunity is for us to make our ties, the state chamber's ties to the local chambers, stronger than ever. I'm a local chamber guy first and foremost, if you look at my resume. And we have to be working together. We've got over 260 companies that have signed on to a letter in support. We understand that Governor McMaster today issued a letter of support. And so we just need to encourage all of you grassroots level, those members of your delegation who are on House Judiciary, let them know that this is your number one priority. And then we'll stay in touch with you so that presuming that it comes out of House Judiciary when it goes to the floor, we'll be prepared to issue a call to action as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Bob. One of the things that Gary touched on as it relates to York County, but really our entire state, is that we have created, quite a destination for folks to come. York County, I think, with its focus, in this area, we have, Lake Wiley, we've got walking trails, we've got biking trails, we've got the new Riverbend property that the county is looking to develop. We have our sports tourism animal, it's just this beast here in York County where we're hosting tournaments. This weekend, we had a huge basketball tournament, teams from Tennessee and Georgia and North Carolina. And of course, that's the old heads in beds when those kind of things happen. Unfortunately, at my house, it meant heads in beds at my house because my sister's family brought along a few players with them. But we had a great time. But lots of people want to come here for a lot of reasons. My question relates to tourism and the fact that we are a destination. And in for us with the pandemic, we are concerned about the folks that are here that either haven't had COVID or haven't been vaccinated. Representative Simrall and I were talking about this before we got started. We do want, for us as a business community here in York County, we've been very involved at the vaccine clinic because we believe that shots in arms means we get back to business as soon as possible. And so, I feel like we're sort of teetering between is it okay? Are we getting there? Are we getting too hopeful? Is there going to be another surge? And none of us can predict the future, but getting, as a business community, engaging in some of those more social issues is not something we normally do, but we felt like with the vaccines that there was, an obvious connection there. I don't know, Representative Simrall, if you have some information on where we are in terms of who has and hasn't been vaccinated at the state level. I know you're working closely with DHEC on those things. And then, Bob, as you know, if you could speak to maybe what you're hearing from the business community and their level of comfort, you know, with what this looks like as people are vaccinated, or discomfort as people come that you may or may not know that about them from other states.
Percentages up, obviously, from those that want to be vaccinated. You know, we've debated this in South Carolina, and South Carolina will not mandate a vaccine. That's not going to be in a policy, but obviously what Rock Hill has done and what has happened statewide is to allow the opportunity. We've gone through the phases. Now it's open for everyone who chooses to get a vaccine. But I would say, look at the numbers, whether it's the numbers of people that live in South Carolina now eclipsing 5.1 million, the number of people that have actually gotten shots in the arm, and the number of people that have tested positive for COVID-19. I had COVID-19 in December, something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but not everybody obviously has the same symptoms or the same reactions as when it comes to COVID. But to return to the sense of normalcy that we talk about is going to require more and more people getting vaccinated as we move forward. It goes back into what Bob talked about, and that is the COVID liability aspects. Those businesses need to feel comfortable in what they do. The customers that walk into businesses need to feel comfortable. And so us on that trajectory of what normal again in 2021, 2022 looks like is directly related back to the number of people that become vaccinated and are comfortable in us moving forward. It takes all of us in that realm, just like it does in the other aspects of life that we talk about, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's economic development, whether it's education. Right now, it's been all hands on deck to make sure that we are getting to where we need to be.
So, you know, retail sales in the U.S. were up, I think, close to double digits in March over February. I don't know if any of you were out. Megan and I were out buying stuff for our new home here this weekend, and the interstate was backed up on Interstate 20 for folks trying to get to the shopping mall. And I think whatever the growth was in March, we're gonna see even bigger numbers. My sense is that people are starting to get out more. That's pretty obvious. My sense of companies is that there's a cautious optimism that yes, about a fifth of the state's population is now fully vaccinated. Most of us either have had one or if we're in the 2-shot program, we're close to that second. I think what's going to be interesting to see is what are the permanent changes that we're going to see in businesses. I had a physical back in February and asked my doctor about flu cases this year. And he said, Bob, I've literally had 0 cases of the flu come into my office during the wintertime, which is usually what keeps him busier than anything. And he said, for him, he's going to continue going forward during flu season. He will wear a mask with all of his patients, and he'll wear a mask when he goes to the grocery store during the winter season. I think, you know, this pandemic has been new to all of us. It's been somewhat of a wake-up call. You can keep an economy running and also protect the public's health. You have to do things differently than we have before. And we are not pushing for a mandate for employers to require the vaccination or other measures, but hopefully we as a population, both in policy and in our personal behaviors, can see that, you know, some of the steps we've taken have helped us to get through the pandemic, but also can help us get through flu season going forward. And I think you'll see a lot of, in the name of safety and public health, a lot of corporations, particularly larger corporations, I think you'll see permanent changes to how you get in and out of their buildings and the places their employees can go to and how they go. So I think there's just, we're close, but you look at countries like, Brazil and India, and then states like Michigan, we're not yet through this. So we need time and we need to continue to be smart. And once we do that, again, all indications are that the economy in South Carolina is ready to roar even more than it has in previous years.
So our next question is regarding the minimum wage, and it reads, while an increase in the minimum wage is vital for workers in South Carolina, how can we balance that with the financial burden it will put on small business owners? And do you think this would impact the type of growth that we see in the future? Bob, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think I used the word crisis earlier. There is such a shortage of labor, skilled, unskilled, people willing to work. And hearing it in the hospitality industry, we're hearing it in the manufacturing sector. And as the economy does come back, it's going to be more and more of a challenge. And so we have to, I'm not even sure the mandated minimum wage, yes, it will have an impact on some individuals. It will have an impact on small businesses who, in many cases, the economists have told us for years that you can raise the minimum wage, but you're going to put people out of work when you do that. And companies will face the choice of whether, if they had 10 employees previously, they may only be able to afford 8 now. In some respects, the market is going to make it somewhat of a moot point in some industries. You're seeing some fairly low skilled manufacturing wages being advertised at $20 an hour. And you talk to the folks who are trying to hire at that level, and they're still frustrated that they can't get the applications that they need, or once the applications come in, the folks don't show up for the interviews, but continue to draw stimulus and unemployment benefits. So we have to stay competitive as a state in continuing to attract population and workforce. We'll benefit from the long time macro trend of people moving from the Northeast to the Sun Belt. But that, I believe, is going to accelerate, and South Carolina needs to be in a position to compete to get more than our fair share, so that we do have enough labor to do the jobs for the companies that are here.
Representative Simrall, do you want to speak to the minimum wage?
Well, and I appreciate Bob's comments, and the interesting part about the minimum wage, and of course now we talk about a living wage versus a minimum wage, but rarely do people talk about benefits that because of the market that companies are now offering to potential employees and current employees. Because if you don't have an employee, obviously you need one. If you have employees that are good, you want to keep them. And so the market will drive much of this. But we start talking about teens in the workplace, and the higher you drive that floor, that minimum wage, the more you're going to turn a teenager's job into a kiosk. And the kiosk is going to become the employee. And I say we tread very lightly when it comes to protecting our businesses. We talk about small business being the backbone of the economy, and it is. We don't always act like it in government, and that becomes a problem. And so I think letting the market drive what needs to happen, letting the ability for teens to have that first job, not the kiosk to get the first job. I think those are very important aspects. As technology changes, the market changes. But for us as a state, we are not venturing into raising the minimum wage in South Carolina. Obviously, that becomes a federal issue as well that we are conformer to. Depends on what happens in Washington. But what we want to do in South Carolina as a General Assembly, and I know Bob supports us in this measure, is to continue to promote employment and businesses and allow them to thrive.
One of the things that we saw as it relates to workforce development last year, there was a lot of momentum. I know Representative Simrall, you were an integral part of getting through the Department of Commerce, basically the 18-wheeler that could come around and help teach different skills and could be revamped.
Be pro, be proud.
Thank you. I was not able to come up with that. So thank you. Be pro, be proud. Yes. But there were a lot of things like that obviously when kids weren't in school, or, they had nowhere to go. And if they did get there, you didn't want a crowd to assemble because of COVID. Are there any initiatives like that are coming, or, on the edge that we can look forward to? Or, I know from the Manufacturers Alliance and others, you know, we hear a lot of new initiatives, but I just don't know where things are.
Well, that's, you asked a great question, and I'm gonna tell you where this initiative had come from was a culmination and a collaboration of the trucking industry, the technical colleges and manufacturers, the chamber, realizing where the needs were. When you look at businesses, I mean, if you're in the restaurant business, you know, how do you get the supplies? They come in typically by truck. Well, if you don't have truck drivers, obviously that creates another issue. We start talking about the minimum wage. There are certain trucking companies who are offering $60,000 to drivers to start in South Carolina. That is huge. That tells you what the need is. The connectivity is that catalyst between potential employee and hired employee. And so to have that ability to work together, recognizing that it's not just one industry that is in need, it is across the board, and the connectivity back between all of those industries to make this happen. And so I look forward to working with different aspects of our economy to make sure that we're addressing those needs. And that was a great segue into pushing toward not only better communication within industries, but to get the final product of what is needed, and that is more and more employees into certain fields that maybe they had not thought about. And so to get into the high schools, technical colleges, again, that ability to draw that silver line between the education leading into employment is extremely important.
Bob, do you want to speak to some of the workforce development initiatives maybe happening at a state level, or that the state chamber is really keeping an eye on?
Well, I can't say I'm fully up to speed on that yet.
What? It's been 7 minutes since you started.
I will. I mentioned this earlier, but those of you who know my story, my mentor in the chamber world was Carol Gray, who was my predecessor at the Charlotte Chamber. Carol, a native South Carolinian, and had run the Greenville Chamber. And Carol spent a whole lot of his time in Charlotte telling the rest of us that South Carolina had one of the best technical community college systems in the country. And he would bring people down to some of those schools to see how they were partnered with industry in such an effective way. And so I'm real excited that in the days ahead, I'm going to be learning more about the role that they play. And as we challenge ourselves to continue to focus, I would say as York County has invested in public education, particularly K through 12, that's probably something that an opportunity for the rest of the state to do even more than what it's already doing in order to help generate the workforce for the jobs of today and tomorrow.
So one of the questions from the audience relates to Western York County. So obviously it's not as close to I-77 as other parts of the county. And the question is asking, what type of growth do you think that they should focus on in Western York County?
Well, fortunately for us, York County is a beautiful place, whether you're on the east or the west. And of course, Highway 5 with the expansion that runs from the west to the east and vice versa, obviously is extremely important. Never forget agriculture. Agriculture is extremely important in South Carolina. It is a huge business. The timber business is huge in South Carolina. York County, if you look at the geographical map, we're a beautiful place, poised in a great place. So not only the I-77, but if you go to Western York County, that I-85 corridor that comes into the Blacksburg, Cherokee County, and then into York. And so as we grow both economically, part of what we talk about is that ability to be able to get from one side of the county quicker. Before, when we had mostly 2-lane or rural roads, that was difficult. So if you're living in the western part of the York County and you appreciate the serenity that is there, we want to make sure that keeps. But we want to make sure as well, and Highway 5 is a perfect example of this, that you have the ability to get from one side of the county to the other in fairly short order. Or if you're continuing to be in the more rural lifestyle, which is beautiful, that happens as well. I think one of the great things that we see in Columbia today is, for our delegation, as example, in York County, we tend to think of Rock Hill or being on the eastern side, but in reality, our delegation is made up of people that represent both rural and urban and suburban area. The fact that we get along so well in promoting economic development, because we do realize that that tax base coming into York County helps everyone in the county. But to maintain the lifestyle of what this county is, I think it's vitally important for us to maintain those agriculture, timber industries in York County is also vitally important.
I think that is spot on. And if I'm remembering my geography correctly, I spent 3 years at the Gaston Chamber, and I believe 321 dropped straight down to York, into Western York County. And I think the representative is absolutely right. You are part of a rapidly growing region, and you've got to figure out what your role is going to be in that context. And you have to control your own destiny. And if you don't, you can look around the Charlotte region, and there are some that have determined what they want to be, and they've done what it takes to get there. There are others who've just kind of had the growth roll over them. And you definitely want to be in the former and figuring out how do you fit in to the broader growth of the region, and then go make that happen.
So Bob, with your experience now in both Carolinas, I'm sure you could do a pro and con list for each, but who would you say in terms of economic development, the Carolinas are competing against the most? Who does it usually come down to?
You talk about the Carolinas broadly competing
Right.
against other.
Right. So we know we compete with North Carolina a good bit on things, but so besides North Carolina, who do you think we're up against?
Well, it's the Sun Belt. We compete with Georgia quite a bit. Tennessee, Nashville is very hot, particularly for the attraction of young people. Their tax structure is attractive. We don't compete as much with Virginia, but we compete with Virginia more today than we did, say, 20 years ago. And then I think you look to some of the Texas markets, Dallas, Austin, in particular. And I'm a little bit of a broken record, but those are the places that people want to live. And more companies are chasing people rather than people chasing companies. That's kind of the old model. And so as we look to be pro-business, we need to think about the workforce and how we get, as I've said, more than our fair share of those people who are voting with their feet and moving to the Sun Belt.
Representative Simrell, I know you work with the Department of Commerce a good bit, and I'm sure that there are a lot of discussions about companies that are looking to come here and what kind of incentives we could offer. Are there states that are doing things that we currently aren't doing, either because we can't due to current regulations or laws, or is there a model we should look at so that we are ready to be competitive when faced with that?
Well, we are the competition. So, I mean, we have been doing well in South Carolina, as you know. Our growth tells that. I mean, nearly 200 miles of coastline that we have in South Carolina. Obviously, that's a draw. The fact that we have ramped up the things that need to happen, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's education, those things that are integral parts. And Bob mentioned, companies chasing people versus people chasing companies. I think that's a truism, because what is happening in South Carolina is the ability, and he mentioned this earlier too, and I did in my opening remarks, and that's the port. Never discount or underestimate the importance of that port and what it means to South Carolina's economy. Well, then you start looking at where we compete with other states that have ports. And of course, in the Sun Belt along the Eastern Seaboard, they do have ports. We need to make sure we maintain what we have. But being competitive is right up our alley. I think that if you start looking at where we have competed to bring certain industries into South Carolina, we have won where we wanted to win. And I think that's vitally important with the new announcements of Chester County, Lancaster County right now, and what is going on. That shows, again, us being fleet of foot and being able to pivot where we need to and make sure that we're poised not only for the growth, but what that means to this area. But everything every box, I would say, has to be checked. We can't do some things great and other things not so much. We have to be on our game at all aspects. And I think if you look back over the last probably 10 years or so, the last decade, we have come further and further in that ability to be able to provide external, internal infrastructure, the statutory requirements that would be needed for incentives for companies to come here, that we have to compete with other states. Again, what we want to make sure is that the policies that we have in South Carolina, which are working, are not deteriorated by the politics of the day. And unfortunately, that tends to happen a lot, or it has the opportunity. And so cooler minds must prevail, and we'll continue on that front. I applaud Governor McMaster and his ability to draw more and more businesses to South Carolina. It's the shake of the hand, if you'll call it, on that type of deal. And people appreciate that in South Carolina. And we're poised for more greatness because of that.
Well, we are running short on time, but I certainly want to give you both a chance to wrap up. We finished the last session on education, and I asked Superintendent of Education Molly Spearman and Representative Ray Felder if they would give me their thoughts on what the silver lining to this pandemic might be. I don't want to pretend that it's over, but or do you see any valuable lessons learned or any silver linings that we may want to hold on to as we wrap up? Representative Simmer, I'll let you start if that's okay.
Well, and oftentimes you don't know what's sweet until you've had what's bitter. And being in a lockdown mode for a time and a little unsure about the economy, I couldn't help but go back and compare 2008 financially to 2020 financially. And obviously there are segments of our economy that have done extremely well and others that have not. Tourism, we talked about earlier, they took it on the chin. But for us to recognize the importance of people and livelihood is extremely important, but to also recognize that South Carolina offers so much ability and space to get out and enjoy and be a part of the community. I think if anything, COVID taught us that we should appreciate where we live, and I look forward to normalcy returning in the best fashion that it can.
I'll ditto that. Bob, do you want to take that one?
I would love to. There were some of us who were part of an effort years ago to, we called it the Charlotte-Columbia Connection. And we brought a group down here and they brought a group up there, and we're trying to figure out how do you make development, good things happen along that I-77 corridor. And York County figured that out long ago, but I'm sitting here just thinking, during this pandemic, South Carolina has played offense. Governor McMaster talks about that frequently. And that corridor is about to be known, I just came up with this, for wide receivers, wine, and whitewater. And you think of those three assets, and that plus all of the other good things happening, that's saying something through a pandemic to have made those things happen. So there is good, strong pro-business leadership in the General Assembly. Representative Simmer, we thank you for the strong leadership you provide. We would say as a business community that there is a need to address comprehensive tax reform and the property tax situation, as well as the corporate income tax rate. South Carolina's corporate rate of 5% is double North Carolina's at 2.5%. Now, the rate is not always what people effectively pay, but it is what people who are researching states go online and they see those two numbers. And so we will be working over the long term on the subject of comprehensive tax reform as a way to make a very pro-business state even better.
From your mouth to God's ears, right?
Thank you. I think
we agree that is needed. In fact, we participated with the state chamber on various studies and done research. And, I know Representative Pope has worked very hard on this through the years. So I think the pump is primed. We're all ready to do what we need to do as a business community to help move that forward. So we certainly appreciate your focus on that and are happy to step in however we can. We are going to close out this final York County Day, and I think it's fitting that Representative Simrell is here. He actually helped me really get some perspective as we were starting to plan York County Day. And of course, woe is me, it's going to have to be virtual, and we can't go to Columbia and they aren't attending events. And it was just all of the focusing on what made it difficult to try to do this year. And he basically said, hey, mission accomplished. York County Day was started to try to get York County Day on the map, and all of the efforts that have been, put forth through the years by various folks have certainly done that. And so as we close out this final York County Day, I want to thank Bob for being here today. I want to thank Representative Simrell for his participation, but we have some words of encouragement from some of the pioneers who actually helped start this many moons ago and have been involved throughout the years. So we're going to play a quick video from them, and then we're going to bring Representative Pope back for some closing remarks, and we'll see you shortly after the video.
And York County Day has helped us maintain an awareness of who we are and where we've been and where we're going to go, and keeping us aware of that and keeping us focused on that. I think that the new generation that's coming along, most of them probably don't have roots from York County. Now that all the big banks have bought up all the community banks, you don't have bank presidents that live in the community very much. We only have a handful of community banks that are local, totally local. And that's where an awful lot of our leadership for the chamber and the nonprofits throughout the county come from, is from businesses that have leaders working for them who can take those skills from their business and put them into the nonprofits.
I think controlling growth and quality of life are both important to us. We do not want to be a big paved, big road kind of city. We want to be a city of families like we were. It was a mill village when we came here in the 70s. It's not a mill village by any means. It's a nice urban city that's, we have the access to Charlotte for a lot, but also we're having a lot of quality growth in downtown. We have 700 apartments under construction right now, and we have quality of life to go with it. We have 3 new restaurants in downtown right now. And all the growth we have going up and down White Street, we have 3,000 athletes and their parents come every weekend to town. Besides everything we have going, we also have the Panthers organization. They're investing $500 million. And so that's going to be a game changer as well. So controlling our quality of life and controlling our zoning, and as we keep that quality of life, that our families and our children can enjoy this community, are very important to our future.
I think we've got to be selective in what we try to recruit to come here. Sometimes we go after a certain type of business, and we can't get that. We can't throw up our hands. We have to, have plan B and C, and we've got to keep going for that. We've got to look for the type of businesses that we are going to need in the future. Knowledge Park is a great example of thinking forward, and we see a lot going on down there. We see tremendous things happening here in the business district of Rock Hill.
I think what you have to do is make things like the Chamber and other volunteer organizations as accessible as you can for younger people. Make it a point to reach out to them and then invite them to be part of an event or an organization or a meeting, or include them when some of these ad hoc groups get formed to attack a particular problem. Include the younger people. You don't want people like me. I'm 1,000 years old. You want people who are going to eventually take over leadership and and help them understand where the levers are.
You won't be able to probably walk in and just take over the world, but you get involved in your chamber, you get involved in organizations where you can learn and meet people, and you get to be a part of a team. The most important thing I would tell young people is, if you want to be a leader, learn that you don't have to have all the answers. You can't. If you want to be a good leader, you've got to meet people, you've got to learn. You've got to learn the issues and get involved. And ultimately, if you get the chance to lead, the way you get success is you harness the collective intelligence of those stakeholders and the people you work with. Because if I make the decision, I might know these 3 things. But if I get you to work with me, we might get to here. And if I get everybody involved, we get this, and we need 10 to get it, we got it. Everybody can make a difference. It's a choice.
Hi, this is Tommy Pope back with you, just wrapping things up today. I hope you had a good day. I hope you learned something that maybe you didn't know. I think what I want, if we could take away from today, is the history and all that's gone before us and all the work that's gone in for some of the things maybe here in York County we take for granted. I think moving forward, as we build, as we make our changes, we got to set goals. We got to determine, it's just not going to come to us. We've got to determine what it is we need to do and what it is we want to be here in York County to maintain our focus, to maintain who we are, to maintain our identity. I'd also urge you that are listening or maybe recruiting people you know to get involved in leadership, whether it's leadership from a local standpoint, whether it's leadership from a governmental standpoint. When I led off this morning, I told you that I didn't know at the time, Gary Simrell and Ray Felder and I would all be in leadership York County back then, and then end up serving in the legislature today, hopefully paying back some of what York County's done for us. So I think with COVID passing, hopefully you'll see that program start back up. It was very, very meaningful to me, one, in building relationships outside my own kind of closed area back then, criminal justice. I think it's helpful of just knowing what the resources here in the community. So I would urge you to do that. I think it's important too, and knock on wood, we're very blessed with a good legislative delegation. I'm not saying that because I'm on it. I'm talking about all my peers that serve. I think most of you in the community know you can easily get in touch with your legislators when you need, and you have our ear. And I think that's important to maintain going forward. We never want to get so separated that we aren't being vigilant, looking out in front of us as to what's coming down the pike and how it affects York County. We still need to be vigilant on the state line. We don't want to be a Charlotte suburb. We want to take those advantages but maintain our identity. So again, I look forward to our new chapter. I look forward to the changes we'll see as we tackle this new endeavor of how we do our York County approach going forward. And people laugh every time I shoot my video. You know where to find me, so I won't give you the Tommy Pope speech. But thanks a lot. Thank you for participating. Look forward to hearing from you.
I just want to say thank you again to Amanda Stewart and her committee, to our chamber staff who's worked so hard to pull this together, to Representatives Pope, Simrell, and Felder, along with we certainly appreciate the amazing leadership you all provide in Columbia. We appreciate our other guest speakers, our other chambers of commerce here locally that have partnered with us, and of course our sponsors. So I hope you will stick around just another moment and watch our closing credits to see the full list of sponsors. And we will also be releasing some additional videos and interviews that we've done, and of course continue to update you on our advocacy efforts moving forward. But for those of you who have been a part of York County Day, past and present, we certainly appreciate what you do and what you mean to the chamber. Thank you.